So let's talk a little bit more about Mind the Gap now, shall we?
Sure.
Okay.
So I actually break it down into three different gaps: the economic gap, the credibility gap, and what I'm calling the resentment gap.
Okay.
And, the economic gap that exists today is one that's new. This is not one that we planned on. We didn't plan on businesses being hit by this global economic downturn, by companies that were in business for many, many years going out of business, and, waking up one day and finding out that the organization that you work for is not financially solvent anymore. So, none of us expected this. And so this economic gap kind of has thrown a wrench into things for us. It's really where we were all getting ready to have a skill gap and a shortage of labor entering the workforce. Now we seem to have the opposite problem. We have too many people, that more than we can afford. And a lot of this is due to the credit. And one of the things I'll be talking about in Lincoln is the 10 steps that leaders should be taking to get through this. And one of those key areas that I believe very strongly in is that this is a time to be tough on costs, but soft on your people. And so, I'll be going through all of those areas during that.
Very important. I want to emphasize something too. When you say all, you're not talking all as in terms of Western countries or the United States, but rather all is in terms of the entire world.
The entire world has been hit by this economic storm. And that actually leads me to the second gap, which is what I call the credibility gap.
Okay.
And I think that, I was thinking about this morning, that there's this whole population of people who one day went to sleep working for an organization that had been around maybe 20 years, 50 years, 100 years, and that was an extremely successful organization, and then they wake up the next day to find out that that organization is bankrupt. And we've heard of this with Lehman Brothers, we've heard of this with Merrill Lynch. Many of the different banks have had that problem around the world, and of course most recently here at Satyam we suffered that.
Yes.
I'm sure people can read about it in the newspaper, but we had our own element of economic disaster because of senior leaders who committed fraud and embezzlement from the firm, basically leaving what was a very successful company down to the bare minimum of assets left.
Yeah.
And so I think that what this is going to do is this is going to create a very long-term credibility gap for employees. We are going to have to find a way to get our organizations past this and moving on back to an area where we can trust the organizations we work for and that we can count on their credibility. And I don't think today there's too many of us who really feel that any organization has a lot of credibility.
And that's actually, it's more rebuilding, it's more building new trust, really, than rebuilding.
It actually is. It's building, and it's building institutional trust.
Yes.
Because it's no longer about relationship. It's about the trust between the associate, the employee, and the institutions that they work for or they buy services from. And so it's really, it's a breakdown it's a shame that it's coming. We've had lots of warnings with Enron and all these other companies, but the fact is that, ethics and integrity have got to be something that is not only core value to organizations around the world, we've got to find a way to better measure it.
The last gap.
The third gap I'm calling the resentment gap. The resentment gap, I think this is a new phenomenon that we're going to see, and to me it's one that we really are going to have to spend a lot of time talking about, looking into, and facilitating, so that leadership teams around the world are able to get through this period of time. And I call it a resentment gap, but it's really more of a generational gap. So if you think about it, we have a lot of leaders who were on the verge of retirement. We read about it all the time. Leaders who are going to be retiring in the next 3 to 5 years, that the vast majority...
Aging workforce.
Right, the baby boomers were going to be retiring. But now, after what's happened in the last 6 months, many of us are going to have to work for even longer than we expected. So many of us are going to have to stay in the workforce. Some of us might have said, oh, well, you know, I'm going to exit the workforce in 3 to 5 years, but we're going to find ourselves having to stay in the workforce 5 to 7 to 10 more years just to break even on the losses that we've had, our financial losses. And so I think that they're going to have a resentment that they have to continue when they were getting ready to and had already planned how they were going to spend retirement or semi-retirement or whatever the next step was going to be for them in their lives. And this is where the resentment gap comes in. It comes in with the next generation as well, because you're going to have the next generation of leaders, because of all of the fact that we've all been getting ready our leaders to take over because we were expecting this mass exodus.
True.
Now these leaders are looking at their watches and they're saying, in 5 more minutes, the person ahead of me goes out the door and it's my turn. And now 5 minutes is actually going to become 5 to 8 years. And they're going to resent the fact that the leaders that are above them today are going to actually hold on for much longer than they expected them to hold on, and which means they're going to have to wait before they can move into their leadership role.
And certainly they'll feel their careers are put on hold.
That's right. They're going to feel their careers are put on hold, and I think that that's going to create this generational resentment. I think that it has the potential for the leaders who stay on to feel very short-term oriented. Why start something new when I'm only here for a few more years? And the leaders who are in the pipeline to actually become very short-term oriented as well. Why should I interject and let someone else get the credit for what I was just about to do? It was my turn to set the vision, set the strategy. So I think this is a dynamic that organizations all over the world are going to have to look at, deal with, facilitate, and be aware. You know, and somebody asked me, you know, how can we solve this problem? And right now I really don't have an answer to how we can solve the problem, except that awareness. We should make our leadership teams aware. We should articulate this. We should make it okay for leaders to be able to speak out that they were wanting to leave, but now they can't, or leaders to speak out that they expected to be leaders, but now they're waiting to be leaders, and allow just the sharing of the feeling. I think that in and of itself will help. Last thing that I wanted to bring up is that, you know, there is a storm behind the storm coming still. Because the storm that we were all waiting for, which is the leadership gap and the skill gap, that storm isn't going to go away. That gap is not going to go away. What's happened is we've postponed it for a few years.
Sure.
But we're still going to find ourselves in the position when the economy does shift back and economy does cycle back and forth. When it cycles back up, we're still going to find ourselves in that position. So with all of the different things going on right now, the economic gap, the credibility gap, the resentment gap, we still can't forget that there is a leadership and a skill gap that is potentially coming up behind that. And that's what we refer to, that's what I mean when I say mind the gap, how to close your resource gaps from the outside in. Yeah, again, this workshop is March 18th, 2009. It's at the Embassy Suites in Lincoln, Nebraska.
Lucky Lincoln.
Co-sponsored by ASTD, Lincoln chapter, and the Southeast Community College, and I look forward to seeing everyone there.
And I hope you enjoy yourselves. And this is Priscilla Nelson with our guest Ed Cohen signing off.
Thank you.
Thanks.